I want to tell you a story. And this story is about someone called Alice. Alice lived in a town called Permanent Job, in a land called Corporate. She was pretty content there, or at least she thought so. She was brought up by caring people who reassured her that Permanent Job was safe and secure, and that the world inside corporate land was full of certainty, and she would do wisely to never leave the safe boundary walls. Sure, it wasn't perfect here, but it was better than the fearsome, uncertain world outside corporate land. Alice was doing very well in her own specific role that was the part she played in Permanent Job Town. She'd been doing this role most of her life in various guises and in different regions of corporate land, but always in the town of Permanent Job. She was totally in her comfort zone. Apart from the stuff she found challenging, like the infights and the politics that would sometimes happen in corporate land, or the decisions that were made by the kings and queens that she just knew in her heart weren't right. She'd been doing this job, though, for many years, this role, and was considered an expert, very well respected, the go-to person. Her LinkedIn profile looked perfect. And in fact, all the things in her life appeared to be in her control, and she had lots of certainty. All looked very well and secure. What more could she possibly want? Then one day something happened. Something called the unprecedented. And it changed everything. At first it didn't concern anyone in corporate land, as it was something they'd heard about in a far off distant land. Nothing for them to worry about, until it was. It crept in quietly, then swept the entire world with its infectious, confusing, ground-shaking power. The kings and queens in corporate land decided that the best thing to do to keep people safe was to cast a spell. And they called this spell furlough. It meant everyone was put into a kind of sleep whilst the kings and queens could just figure out what to do about the unprecedented. For Alice, this was frustrating and confusing at first because it was the first time she'd ever not done her role in Permanent Job Town, and she found herself with a lot of time on her hands, and it was actually very uncomfortable. She even began to question her identity because, after all, who was she if she wasn't doing her role in Permanent Job? Especially as her whole life and self-worth was measured by her success in the town of Permanent Job. But quite quickly, she realised the furlough spell presented her with an opportunity to stop and enjoy her family and find new things that she loved, and to reflect on who she really was, and what her place in corporate land was, and what she really truly wanted out of her life here. Over time, the unprecedented reduced in force. Then it would seem to go stronger and then subside again, and each time the kings and queens of corporate land put the people of Permanent Job under this furlough spell. Then eventually, the time came for the furlough spell to be released. People could finally go back to their roles in Permanent Job Town, and everyone rejoiced. But for Alice, it was too late. The furlough spell had changed her fundamentally. Something was just not the same. And she began to realise that the fear of the unprecedented had been a red herring all along. She now had a new foe. And that foe was called the Dragon of Dread. The beast swooped into Permanent Job Town completely unexpectedly and made her suddenly feel very fearful about going back and doing her role. She knew she didn't want to remain under the furlough spell forever, but she certainly didn't want to go back and be singed and scorched by the dread dragon. This creature represented all the uncomfortable, icky, sludgy things about corporate land that she'd been doing her best to ignore for years. When she realised this could be the rest of her working life, under the tyranny of the dread dragon, it made her feel ill, lost and adrift, and very, very trapped. The day came for her to finally face the dragon. She decided she was going to be brave and face it head on. In fact, she thought, I'm going to talk to the dragon and see what he's all about. So she did. And what happened was a curious thing. She realised that it wasn't the unprecedented that she should be fearing, and nor was it the dragon. When she spoke to the dragon, she actually realised he was quite nice and was really just trying to help her. He was trying to tell her something all along, that something more insidious was creeping in. And that something was called the void. A big, wide open space of joyless, fearful boredom. Being kept in Permanent Job Town, even though she knew it was making her unhappy. She also now knew that she could not deny that fact any longer. That the unprecedented had shown her that her role in Permanent Job Town was not as certain and secure as she'd always been led to believe. It just wasn't for her anymore. She had to get out of corporate land altogether. Then, as if by magic, her fairy godmother appeared. She sat Alice down and had a frank and honest conversation with her about what was really going on here. Alice, even though it felt quite scary, decided to see what life was like outside the walls of corporate land. It wasn't easy to be brave, though, especially when all those trapped in corporate land around her were shouting, "No, don't do it. This is the wrong time to leave Permanent Job Town. What if the unprecedented comes back?" But Alice gathered all her might and courage and took the hand of her fairy godmother. Together, they walked towards a big, beautiful door that she'd never even noticed on the outskirts and the very boundaries of corporate land. There was a sign above the door saying, "Do not pass this point. If you do, you shall never return." Although this was a little nerve-wracking to see, she kept going anyway, because she knew she had to. She could see beams of light coming from around the sides of the door, and she couldn't wait to see what was beyond those walls. So together, Alice and the fairy opened the door to a magical new land. It was so bright and clear, and the air that whooshed towards her felt so fresh. Her eyes could hardly adjust to the light, so she took a moment to behold what she was seeing, and with excitement in her core, knowing this felt more right than anything she'd ever done in her entire life, she walked through the door to free range land.